It was a bitterly cold winter night in the bustling city of New York. Snow fell relentlessly, blanketing the streets in a thick layer of white. The streetlights flickered in the icy wind, casting a dim glow over the empty sidewalks. Maya Brooks, a young woman with a worn coat and a tattered scarf, trudged through the snow, her breath visible in the freezing air. She clutched a small bag of belongings close to her chest, her fingers numb from the cold. Life had not been kind to Maya. Once a hopeful dreamer, she now found herself homeless, struggling to survive each day. Maya's only solace was her resilience. Despite her circumstances, she refused to give up. She had learned to navigate the harsh streets of the city, finding warmth in shelters when she could, and relying on the kindness of strangers when luck was on her side. But tonight, the shelters were full, and the biting wind seemed determined to break her spirit. As she walked down a quiet street, her eyes scanned the area for any sign of refuge. That's when she saw him, a small figure, barely visible through the swirling snow. At first, she thought her tired mind was playing tricks on her, but as she moved closer, her heart sank. A little boy, no older than 5, stood shivering on the sidewalk. His thin jacket was no match for the brutal cold, and his small hands were bare, trembling as he hugged himself for warmth. His face was streaked with tears, his wide eyes filled with fear. Maya's heart ached at the sight. She knew what it felt like to be alone, to feel helpless. Without hesitation, she approached him, her voice soft but urgent. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, crouching down to his level. "Are you okay? Where's your family?" The boy didn't answer. Instead, he raised a shaky hand and pointed toward the road. Maya followed his gaze and froze. Through the flurry of snow, she saw it, a car overturned in a shallow ditch. Its front end was crumpled, and one of the headlights flickered weakly. Steam billowed from the hood. Maya's breath quickened. She turned back to the boy, her voice trembling. "Is someone in there?" The boy nodded, fresh tears streaming down his red cheeks. Maya didn't hesitate. She wrapped her coat tightly around the boy's frail frame and whispered, "Stay here. I'll be right back." As the wind howled around her, Maya made her way toward the wreck, her boots slipping on the icy ground. She had no idea what she would find, but she knew one thing: she couldn't turn away. Maya's heart pounded as she approached the wrecked car. The snowstorm was relentless, the icy wind biting at her face and numbing her fingers. She could barely see through the swirling snow, but the faint flicker of the car's headlight guided her steps. Her boots slipped on the frozen ground, but she pressed forward, determined to help whoever was trapped inside. When she reached the car, she hesitated for a moment, her breath visible in short, sharp bursts. The windows were fogged with frost, but she could just make out a figure slumped over the steering wheel. Her stomach twisted. Someone was in there, and they weren't moving. "Hello?" Maya called out, her voice trembling. "Can you hear me?" There was no response. She tried the driver's side door, but it wouldn't budge. The frame was bent from the impact, and the freezing metal stung her hands as she pulled at it with all her strength. "Come on," she muttered through gritted teeth, her desperation growing. She glanced back at the little boy, who stood shivering by the roadside, his arms wrapped tightly around himself. She couldn't let him lose whoever was in that car. Summoning every ounce of strength she had, Maya yanked at the door again. With a groan of protest, it finally gave way and she stumbled backward into the snow. She quickly regained her footing and leaned into the car, her hands trembling as she reached for the man inside. He was slumped forward, his head resting awkwardly on the steering wheel. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, staining his pale skin. Maya's chest tightened as she placed 2 fingers on his neck, searching for a pulse. Relief washed over her when she felt a faint but steady beat. "Hey," she said urgently, shaking his shoulder gently. "Can you hear me? You've been in an accident." The man didn't respond. His eyelids fluttered slightly, but he remained unconscious. Maya knew she didn't have much time. The freezing temperatures and his injuries could be fatal if she didn't act quickly. She glanced back at the boy again, who was now watching her with wide, tear-rilled eyes. "It's going to be okay," she called out to him, trying to sound reassuring. I'm going to help your dad. Maya wrapped her arms under the man's shoulders and began to pull him out of the car. He was heavy, and the awkward angle of the vehicle made it even harder. Her muscles screamed in protest, and the cold air burned her lungs, but she refused to give up. Come on, she whispered, her voice strained. You're not dying here, not tonight. After what felt like an eternity, she managed to drag him out of the car and onto the snow-covered ground. She crouched beside him, panting, her hands trembling as she fumbled for the old, cracked phone she kept in her bag. Her fingers were so numb that it took her several tries to dial 911. There's been an accident, she told the dispatcher, her voice cracking. One adult male, unconscious, and a child 5 years old. We're on Elm Street, near the old factory. Please hurry. The dispatcher assured her that help was on the way, but the worsening snowstorm meant there would be delays. Maya's heart sank. She didn't know how long the man could hold on. The man groaned softly, his eyelids fluttering open for a brief moment. His gaze was unfocused, and his voice was barely audible as he mumbled, "Noah, my son, is he okay?" Maya leaned closer, her voice gentle but firm. He's fine, he's safe, stay with me, okay? Help is coming. She turned her attention to the boy, who was now visibly shaking. Shrugging off her coat, she hurried over and draped it around his small shoulders. Here, sweetheart, she whispered, kneeling in front of him. It's going to be okay. You're safe now. The boy clung to her coat, his lips quivering. Is my daddy hurt? He asked in a tiny, fearful voice. Maya placed her hands on his small shoulders, forcing a reassuring smile despite the fear gnawing at her. Your daddy's a little hurt, but he's strong. He's going to be okay, I promise. The snow fell heavier now, the wind howling through the empty street. Maya returned to the man's side, her breath coming in quick, visible puffs. She gently wiped the blood from his forehead with her sleeve, trying to keep him awake. Stay with me, she urged again, her voice shaking but determined. Just a little longer. Minutes felt like hours as the storm raged on. Finally, the faint wail of sirens pierced the howling wind, and Maya's chest tightened with relief. The ambulance lights cut through the darkness, illuminating the chaotic scene. Paramedics rushed to Maya's side, taking over with practiced precision. One of them, a woman with a kind face, gave Maya a reassuring nod. You did good, she said, her tone calm. Maya stepped back, holding the boy close as he buried his face in her shoulder. Her own legs felt weak, but she stayed standing. Little did she know this single act of kindness would unravel a series of events that would change her life forever. The hospital was a blur of bright lights and hurried footsteps. Maya sat in the waiting area, her hands trembling as she held a cup of lukewarm coffee someone had handed her. She hadn't even taken a sip. Her mind was racing, replaying the events of the night over and over again. Beside her, the little boy Noah sat curled up in a chair, wrapped in her oversized coat. His small frame seemed even smaller under the harsh fluorescent lights. He hadn't said much since they arrived, but his wide, tear-rimmed eyes never left the hallway where the doctors had taken his father. Maya glanced at him, her heart aching. She didn't know much about this boy or his father, but she felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility for them. She had found them in their moment of need, and now she couldn't bring herself to leave. Are you okay, sweetheart? She asked softly, leaning toward him. Noah nodded, but his lips quivered. Is my daddy going to be okay? Maya hesitated, unsure of what to say. She didn't want to make promises she couldn't keep, but she also couldn't bear to see the fear in his eyes. The doctors are taking good care of him, she said gently. Your daddy's strong, he'll be okay. Noah sniffled and wiped his nose with the sleeve of his shirt. You saved him, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Maya felt a lump form in her throat. I just did what anyone would do, she said, though deep down she wasn't sure if that was true. She had seen plenty of people walk past others in need, pretending not to notice. But she couldn't do that, not tonight, not with this little boy looking so lost and scared. Before she could say more, a doctor approached them, his expression calm but serious. Maya stood up quickly, her heart pounding. "Are you family?" the doctor asked, glancing between her and Noah. Maya hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I just found them, but this is his son." The doctor nodded, crouching down to Noah's level. "Your dad is going to be okay," he said with a reassuring smile. "He has a concussion and a few cuts and bruises, but nothing too serious. He's awake now and asking for you." Noah's face lit up with relief, and he jumped out of the chair. "Can I see him?" "Of course," the doctor said, standing up. He looked at Maya. "You can come too, if you'd like." Maya hesitated. She didn't want to intrude, but the way Noah reached for her hand made it clear he wanted her to come. She nodded and followed the doctor down the hallway, her heart still racing. When they entered the room, Maya saw the man, Agnes Pontreux, propped up in a hospital bed. His face was pale, and a bandage covered the cut on his forehead, but his eyes were open and alert. The moment he saw Noah, his expression softened. "Noah," he said, his voice hoarse but filled with relief. "Daddy!" Noah ran to his side, climbing onto the bed and wrapping his small arms around his father's neck. Ethan winced slightly but didn't let go, holding his son tightly. Maya stood awkwardly by the door, unsure of what to do. She felt like an outsider in this intimate moment. But Ethan's gaze shifted to her, and his expression changed. "You're the one who saved us," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. Maya shook her head, her cheeks flushing. I couldn't leave you there. I'm glad you're okay." Ethan studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to piece together her story. "What's your name?" "Maya," she said quietly. "Well, Maya," he said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion in his eyes. "I owe you my life, and my son." "You don't owe me anything," Maya said quickly, shifting uncomfortably. "I just did what anyone would do." Ethan gave her a small, tired smile. "Not everyone would have done what you did. You risked your life for strangers. That's not something I'll ever forget." Maya didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to being thanked, let alone praised. She looked down at her hands, feeling out of place in the sterile hospital room. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Ethan asked suddenly, his tone gentle but concerned. Maya hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "I'll figure something out," she said vaguely. Ethan frowned, clearly not satisfied with her answer, but before he could press further, a nurse entered the room, interrupting the conversation. "You need to rest, Mr. Cole," the nurse said firmly. "Your body's been through a lot." Ethan nodded reluctantly, then looked back at Maya. "Please, don't leave yet. I'd like to talk to you more." Maya nodded, though she wasn't sure why. Something about the way he looked at her, grateful but also curious, made her feel like this wasn't the end of their story. As she stepped out of the room to give them privacy, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The next morning, Maya sat in the hospital cafeteria, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. She hadn't slept all night, her mind too restless to find peace. The events of the previous evening played on a loop in her head: the overturned car, the little boy's tear-streaked face, and the man she had pulled from the wreckage. She had planned to leave quietly once she was sure they were safe, but something kept her there. Maybe it was the way Noah had clung to her hand, or the way Ethan had looked at her with such gratitude. Whatever it was, she couldn't bring herself to walk away just yet. As she stared into the dark liquid in her cup, a voice broke through her thoughts. "Maya?" She looked up to see Ethan standing a few feet away, leaning slightly on a crutch. He looked better than he had the night before, though the bandage on his forehead and the stiffness in his movements were clear reminders of the accident. "Mr. Cole," she said, standing up quickly, "you shouldn't be out of bed." Ethan waved off her concern with a small smile. "I'm fine. The doctor said I could move around a little." He gestured to the chair across from her. "May I?" Maya hesitated, then nodded. Ethan lowered himself into the chair, his movements careful. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Maya wasn't sure what to say, and Ethan seemed to be studying her as if trying to figure her out. "I wanted to thank you again," he said finally, his voice sincere. "What you did last night? I don't even have the words. You saved my life, and Noah's." Maya shook her head, her cheeks flushing. "I just did what anyone would do." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "I don't think that's true. Most people would have walked right past us, but you didn't." Maya looked down at her hands, unsure of how to respond. She wasn't used to being noticed, let alone praised. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his expression softening. "Maya, I don't mean to pry, but do you have somewhere to go? Somewhere safe?" Her stomach tightened. She had been dreading this question, knowing it would come eventually. She could lie, but something about Ethan's gaze made her feel like he would see right through her. I don't," she admitted quietly. "Not really." Ethan's brow furrowed, concern flickering across his face. "And you've been living like this? On the streets?" Maya nodded, her cheeks burning with shame. "It's not as bad as it sounds. I manage." Ethan shook his head, his jaw tightening. "That's no way to live, especially not for someone like you." Maya frowned, confused. "Someone like me?" "Someone who's willing to risk everything to help a stranger," Ethan said simply. "You deserve better than this." Maya didn't know what to say. She had spent so long being invisible, overlooked by the world, that hearing someone speak to her with such kindness felt almost foreign. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then leaned back in his chair. "I have a proposition for you," he said carefully. Maya's eyes narrowed slightly. "A proposition?" Ethan nodded. "Noah hasn't stopped talking about you since last night. He's already attached to you, and honestly, I can't blame him. You have a way of making people feel safe." Maya blinked, unsure of where this was going. "I need help," Ethan continued. "With Noah. My work keeps me busy, and after what happened last night, I realized I can't do this alone. I need someone I can trust to look after him. Someone who cares." Maya's heart skipped a beat. Are you offering me a job?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, as Noah's nanny. It's not just a job, though. You'd have a place to stay, food, everything you need. You wouldn't have to worry about surviving anymore." Maya stared at him, her mind racing. The offer sounded too good to be true. She had spent so long scraping by, fighting for every meal, every warm night. The idea of stability, of safety, felt almost impossible to grasp. "I don't know," she said hesitantly. "I've never done anything like that before." "You don't have to be perfect," Ethan said gently. "You just have to care, and I know you do." Maya looked down at her hands, her thoughts a whirlwind of doubt and hope. She thought of Noah's small hand in hers, the way he had looked at her with trust and comfort. She thought of the cold nights on the streets, the endless hunger and fear. Finally, she looked up at Ethan, her voice barely above a whisper. "Okay, I'll do it." Ethan's face broke into a relieved smile. "Thank you, Maya. You won't regret this." Maya nodded, though she wasn't sure if she believed him. All she knew was that, for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a chance at something better. Maya adjusted the strap of her bag nervously as she stood in front of Ethan's sprawling townhouse. The building was nothing like the cold, crumbling shelters she had grown used to. It was elegant, with tall windows and a polished wooden door that seemed to gleam even in the pale winter sunlight. She felt out of place, like she didn't belong here. Ethan opened the door before she could knock, his warm smile immediately putting her at ease. "Come in," he said, stepping aside to let her enter. Maya hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The warmth of the house enveloped her, and she couldn't help but glance around in awe. The interior was just as beautiful as the outside. High ceilings, soft lighting, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine. "Daddy!" a small voice called out, and before Maya could process what was happening, Noah came running down the hallway. He stopped when he saw her, his face lighting up with recognition. "Naya!" he exclaimed, running straight to her and wrapping his small arms around her waist. Maya froze for a moment, startled by the sudden affection, but then she smiled and knelt down to his level. "Hi, Noah," she said softly. "How are you feeling?" "Better," he said, his voice bright. "Daddy said you're going to stay with us now. Is that true?" Maya glanced up at Ethan, who was watching the interaction with a small smile. She nodded. "Yes, I'll be here to help take care of you." Noah grinned and grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the living room. "Come on, I want to show you my toys." Ethan chuckled as he followed them. "He's been talking about you non-stop since the hospital," he said. "I think you've already won him over." Maya smiled, though she still felt a little out of her depth. She had never been around children much, but there was something about Noah's energy and innocence that made her feel at ease. Over the next few weeks, Maya settled into her new role as Noah's nanny. At first it was overwhelming. She wasn't used to the structure of a daily routine, and the idea of being responsible for someone else's well-being was daunting. But Noah made it easy. He was a sweet, curious child who quickly grew attached to her, and she found herself growing attached to him in return. Ethan, too, was a constant presence. Though his work as a CEO kept him busy, he made an effort to spend time with Noah whenever he could. Maya often found herself watching the two of them together, her heart softening at the sight of Ethan's gentle, attentive nature. One evening, as she was tucking Noah into bed, he looked up at her with wide, curious eyes. "Maya," he said, his voice small, "do you have a family?" The question caught her off guard. She hesitated, unsure of how to answer. I used to," she said finally, "but not anymore." Noah frowned. "What happened?" Maya sighed, sitting down on the edge of his bed. "It's a long story," she said gently. "But it's okay. I have you and your dad now, don't I?" Noah smiled at that, his eyes brightening. "Yeah, you do." As she turned off the light and closed the door behind her, Maya couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. She had spent so long feeling alone, but now, for the first time in years, she felt like she was part of something again. One afternoon, as she was helping Noah with a puzzle in the living room, Ethan walked in, holding a stack of papers. He looked at her with a strange expression, one that was both hesitant and thoughtful. "Maya," he said, sitting down across from her, "can I talk to you for a moment?" She nodded, setting the puzzle piece in her hand down. "Of course." Ethan hesitated, then handed her one of the papers. It was an old photograph, slightly faded, but the image was clear. It showed a young woman with a bright smile and kind eyes. Maya's breath caught in her throat. That's my sister," she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded, his expression softening. "Her name was Sarah, wasn't it?" Maya nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "How do you know her?" Ethan took a deep breath. "Sarah and we were together for a while. Before Noah was born, she was the love of my life." Maya stared at him, her mind racing. She had always wondered what had happened to Sarah, why she had disappeared from their lives so suddenly. Now the pieces were starting to fall into place. "She never told me about you," Maya said quietly. Ethan's expression grew pained. "She didn't want to burden you. She always talked about how much she loved you, how she wanted you to have a better life. When she passed away," he trailed off, his voice thick with emotion. Maya felt a tear slip down her cheek. She had spent so long mourning her sister, feeling like a part of her was missing. Now, sitting here with Ethan and Noah, she realized that part of Sarah still lived on, in them. "I'm so sorry," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper, "for everything you've been through. If I had known—" Maya shook her head, wiping her tears. "It's not your fault, and maybe this is where I'm supposed to be now." Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite name, gratitude maybe, or something deeper. As the days turned into weeks, Maya found herself growing closer to both Ethan and Noah. They weren't just her employers anymore, they were becoming her family. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Maya had settled into her new life with Ethan and Noah, and for the first time in years, she felt a sense of stability. The townhouse, which had once felt so foreign and intimidating, now felt like home. She had her own room, warm meals, and a purpose. But more than that, she had Noah, who had become like a son to her, and Ethan, whose presence had started to mean more than she was willing to admit. It was a quiet evening in late spring when Maya found herself sitting on the back patio, watching the sunset. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, and the air was warm, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers. She had just finished putting Noah to bed, and the house was peaceful. Ethan stepped outside, holding 2 mugs of tea. He handed one to her and sat down in the chair beside her. "You've been quiet tonight," he said, his voice soft. Maya smiled faintly, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Just thinking," she said. "About what?" She hesitated, unsure of how much to share. "About how much has changed," she admitted. "A few months ago I was sleeping on the streets, wondering if I'd even make it through the winter. And now I'm here." Ethan studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "You deserve to be here, Maya," he said firmly. "You've given so much to Noah, to me. I don't know what we would have done without you." Maya looked down at her tea, her cheeks flushing. "I don't feel like I've done anything special," she said quietly. Ethan leaned forward, his voice gentle but insistent. "You've done more than you realize. You've brought light back into this house. You've given Noah a sense of security, of love. And you've reminded me what it feels like to have hope again." Maya's heart skipped a beat at his words. She glanced at him, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment the world seemed to stand still. There was something in his gaze, something warm and unspoken, that made her chest tighten. She quickly looked away, her thoughts swirling. She couldn't let herself feel this way. Ethan was her employer, and she was just a former homeless woman trying to rebuild her life. Whatever she thought she felt, it wasn't possible. But as the days went on, it became harder to ignore the growing connection between them. It was in the way Ethan would linger in the kitchen while she made breakfast, asking about her day. It was in the way he would smile at her when she laughed at one of Noah's jokes. It was in the quiet moments they shared after Noah had gone to bed, talking about everything and nothing. One evening, as they were cleaning up after dinner, Ethan turned to her suddenly. "Maya," he said, his voice serious. She looked up, startled by his tone. "Yes?" "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, setting down the dish he was holding. "Why did you help us that night? You didn't know us. You could have walked away, but you didn't." Maya hesitated, her hands stilling in the soapy water. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I guess I saw Noah standing there, all alone, and I couldn't just leave him. He reminded me of myself in a way, lost, scared. I knew what that felt like, and I couldn't let him go through it alone." Ethan's expression softened, and he stepped closer to her. "You have the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met," he said quietly. Maya felt her cheeks flush, and she quickly turned back to the sink. "I'm just trying to do the right thing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. She froze, her heart pounding as she turned to face him. "You've done more than the right thing," he said, his voice steady. "You've changed our lives, Maya, and I don't think I can ever thank you enough for that." Maya's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. All she could do was look at him, her emotions swirling in a way that both terrified and exhilarated her. Before either of them could say anything more, a small voice broke the moment. "Daddy, Maya." They both turned to see Noah standing in the doorway, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "What's wrong, buddy?" Ethan asked, his voice immediately softening. I had a bad dream, Noah mumbled, his lower lip trembling. Maya quickly dried her hands and walked over to him, crouching down to his level. It's okay, sweetheart, she said gently. Do you want me to sit with you until you fall back asleep? Noah nodded, and she took his hand, leading him back upstairs. As she tucked him into bed, she couldn't help but glance back at the doorway, where Ethan stood watching them with a look she couldn't quite decipher. That night, as she lay in bed, Maya couldn't stop thinking about the way Ethan had looked at her. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't alone. Months passed, and the bond between Maya, Ethan, and Noah only grew stronger. The townhouse, once a place of quiet and routine, now felt alive with laughter and warmth. Maya had become an irreplaceable part of their lives, and though she tried to keep her feelings for Ethan buried, they had grown deeper with every passing day. Ethan, too, had changed. He smiled more, laughed more, and spent more time at home. He had always been a devoted father, but now, with Maya by his side, he seemed lighter, as though a weight he had carried for years had finally been lifted. One crisp autumn evening, the three of them were in the backyard, carving pumpkins for Halloween. Noah was giggling as he scooped out the slimy insides of his pumpkin, his hands covered in orange goo. Look, Maya, he exclaimed, holding up a handful of seeds. It's so gross. Maya laughed, wiping her hands on a towel. That's the best part, Noah. The messier, the better. Ethan watched them from his seat on the patio, a soft smile on his face. He loved seeing them together. Maya's gentle patience with Noah, the way she made him laugh. It was a sight he never thought he'd see again after losing Sarah. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Ethan stood up and walked over to them. How about we take a break, he suggested. I'll make some hot chocolate. Noah cheered, jumping up and down. With marshmallows? Of course, Ethan said with a chuckle. Maya smiled as she watched Ethan head inside, her heart swelling with a mix of emotions. She had never imagined her life could look like this, so full, so warm. Later that evening, after Noah had gone to bed, Maya found herself sitting on the couch, a blanket draped over her lap. Ethan joined her, handing her a mug of hot chocolate. Thanks, she said softly, taking a sip. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the crackling of the fireplace filling the room, but Maya could feel Ethan's gaze on her, and when she finally looked at him, her breath caught. Maya, he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. There's something I need to say. She set her mug down, her heart pounding. What is it? Ethan hesitated as though searching for the right words. When you came into our lives, I didn't know how much I needed you. You didn't just save me and Noah that night. You gave us something we'd lost. You gave us hope. You gave us a family. Maya's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. I've been trying to find the right time to tell you this. Ethan continued, his voice softening. But the truth is, I've fallen in love with you, Maya, and I don't want to imagine my life without you in it. Maya's breath hitched, her heart racing. She had dreamed of hearing those words, but now that they were real, she didn't know what to say. I know this might be a lot, Ethan said quickly, his expression earnest, and I don't want you to feel pressured, but I needed you to know how I feel. Maya wiped a tear from her cheek, her voice trembling as she finally spoke. Ethan, I don't know what to say. I never thought someone like you could feel that way about someone like me. Ethan reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. Maya, you're the strongest, kindest person I've ever met. You've been through so much, and yet you still have so much love to give. You're not just someone, Maya. You're everything. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at him, her walls crumbling. I love you too, she whispered. Ethan's face broke into a relieved smile, and before she could say anything more, he leaned in and kissed her. It was soft and gentle, filled with all the emotions they had both been holding back. When they pulled apart, Maya laughed through her tears. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice shaky but filled with hope. Ethan smiled, his eyes shining. "Now, we build a life together, you, me, and Noah, as a family." A few months later, on a snowy winter evening, Ethan and Maya stood in the backyard of the townhouse, surrounded by a small group of close friends and family. The air was crisp, and fairy lights twinkled in the trees, casting a warm glow over the scene. Noah stood between them, holding a small bouquet of flowers. He grinned up at Maya, his excitement contagious. "You look so pretty, Maya," he said, his voice filled with awe. Maya smiled down at him, her heart full. "Thank you, sweetheart." Ethan took her hands in his eyes never leaving hers. "Maya Brooks," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You came into my life when I least expected it, and you changed everything. You showed me what it means to love again, and I promise to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you've made me." Maya's voice trembled as she responded, "Ethan, you gave me a second chance when I thought I had nothing left. You and Noah are my family, my home, and I promise to love you both with everything I have." As they exchanged vows, the snow began to fall softly around them, blanketing the world in quiet beauty. When Ethan kissed her, the small crowd erupted into cheers, and Noah clapped his hands excitedly. For the first time in years, Maya felt whole. She had found love, a family, and a place where she truly belonged. And as she stood there, surrounded by warmth and light, she knew that this was only the beginning of their happily ever after. As the snow continued to fall that evening, Maya looked around at the people who had gathered to celebrate their union. It was a moment she never thought she would experience, a life she never imagined could be hers. From the cold, lonely streets to the warmth of a family, her journey had been one of resilience, hope, and love. Noah ran up to her, his cheeks flushed from the cold, and wrapped his arms around her waist. "I'm so happy, Maya," he said, his voice filled with pure joy. She knelt down, pulling him into a tight hug. "Me too, sweetheart, me too." Ethan joined them, placing a hand on her shoulder and smiling down at both of them. "We're a team now," he said softly. "Forever." Maya nodded, her heart full. She had spent so long believing she wasn't worthy of love or happiness, but Ethan and Noah had shown her otherwise. They had given her a second chance, and she had embraced it with everything she had. As the evening went on, laughter and joy filled the air. Maya couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. Her story was proof that even in the darkest moments, there is always a glimmer of light. Sometimes that light comes from the kindness of strangers. Sometimes it comes from within. Her journey wasn't just about finding love. It was about finding herself. And as she stood there, surrounded by the people she loved, she knew one thing for certain. No matter where you come from or what you've been through, it's never too late to start over. It's never too late to find your happily ever after. Thank you so much for watching this heartwarming story. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more inspiring tales about love, family, and second chances, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel, Emma's Stories. We post new stories every week, so make sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. And if this story touched your heart, share it with your friends and family. It might just brighten their day too. Thank you for being a part of Emma's Stories. See you in the next video.